One big element of the GOP tax reform bill is a repeal of the estate tax. The estate tax is a tax on estates that occurs when someone dies. It only applies right now to a fairly limited amount of people. For an individual, you have to have an estate of about 5.5 million or higher before any estate taxes are applied. And for married couples, it's 11 million. The way the estate tax currently works, roughly, is when someone dies and they have more than the $5.5 or $11 million, the amount over that, so if they had $20 million and they were a couple, $9 million would be taxed at a tax rate of 40%, meaning about $3.5 million of taxes would be paid. So their child or heir would only get about $16.5 million, as opposed to the full 20. So let's take a look at the Republican plan to repeal this and what that will do, and some of the reasons behind it, and whether it's a good idea or not. So the Republican plan initially just doubles the amount you can exempt and then slowly phases out over the next 6 years the estate tax, but the real goal is to eliminate the estate tax. This is largely a decision driven by ideology rather than any practical economic goal. Most people, even Republicans, do not think eliminating the estate tax is going to be a major economic boon. They simply think that the estate tax is unfair. And that idea rests around two concepts. The first is this concept of double taxation. When you earn this money in the first place, you are earning it through one of the conventional ways and paying taxes. So you are either earning it as income or as capital gains, and you're paying those tax rates on it. So there's this idea that this money has already been taxed. And so we don't need to tax it again, and in fact it's wrong to do it. Additionally, there's this concept that as a parent, you should be able to use your financial resources to support your children. That's one of the main things you do, is you give them a leg up through your own money. So you work really hard in order to provide for your children, and you become very wealthy if you're lucky and able. And so it's unfair to place limits on how parents can use their money to support their children. That is essentially what the estate tax does. As a parent, you have earned that money, and you feel like you should have the right to pass it on in its entirety to your children. And that makes a lot of sense, and is something I think a lot of people would agree with. However, there is a reason for keeping the estate tax, and there's a reason it exists in the first place. So one of the biggest reasons for support of the estate tax is that people don't feel that children have done anything to earn their parents' money, and that's largely true. So when you, as a child of a wealthy person, inherit a lot of money, you really didn't do any work to get that money. And so why should you get all of that money tax-free when some of it could be taxed and used to benefit society at large? The basis of capitalism and of our current market system is that people who work hard, make good decisions, will eventually move up in the world and become wealthier and wealthier. But if so much of wealth is inherited, then that's not going to be true, as it will be much more important to have been born into a wealthy family than to have worked your way up. And so in order to create any sort of meritocracy, you need to have some sort of estate tax that tamps down at least a little bit the advantages that the wealthy get. And there's a big fear of creating a permanent sort of capitalistic aristocracy whereby, one or two generations will have built up an enormous amount of wealth, but because it's never taxed again, their ancestors will remain wealthy and powerful indefinitely, even though they've had to do no work to get to that position. They just happen to be born into the right family. And then with the estate tax as well, there's also a real hard practical implication, and that is that it's tax dollars coming into the system. And these tax dollars really should be pretty easy to collect politically, because the estate tax only affects the very wealthiest among us. Less than 0.2% of estates pass the minimum threshold to even be taxed at all. And no middle class or poor person or their family is negatively impacted by these taxes at all. You're also taxing it away from someone who never earned the money. So from a practical perspective, it's a relatively small revenue stream on the whole, but it is still a significant revenue stream that's fairly easy for the federal government to create. On the whole, for me, I do not think it's a very good idea to eliminate the estate tax, and I think the Republicans may have some problems politically pushing this through. Ideologically, it seems really tough because, on the one hand, I definitely do want to be able to pass on any wealth I have to my children, no matter how wealthy I am. But at the same time, I don't really think I have that much of a right to any wealth I would inherit, and I don't think my children have that much of a right to become multimillionaires or billionaires tax-free just because they happen to be my children and I happen to be very successful. So on the whole, I come down on the side of keeping the estate tax where it is. But that's just my take on it. Let me know what you think about the estate tax, whether you think it should be eliminated altogether, or whether you think it should be increased, or the amount you can deduct decreased or increased, and just generally what you think our estate tax policy should be. And like and subscribe to learn more.